And as you can see in the next move, white is going to place this knight to g5. By this, he can target this h7 pawn. And to stop this, the best option for black is to simply play h6. But instead, here Kramnik brings back his bishop to g6, asking for bishop exchange. And since this h7 pawn is now attacked, so that's why here Kramnik goes for f5. And suppose if white unpassant, then simply knight takes f6. And clearly you can see here white successfully defends this h7 pawn. Okay, so in the actual game after the move f5, here so that's why Topalov brings his bishop to e3. And clearly you can see the planning of white. Here he wants to launch an attack from the king side, and in the next few moves, this rook on a1 will also participate in this attack. Okay, so now he wants to reroute this knight to g6, which will be a very great outpost for this knight. And now in this position, white can consider this move, which is queen to b5, which attacks this bishop as well as this pawn on b7. But what if black brings his queen to e7, which guards both of these both of this piece. But after that, simply rook at f goes to c1, taking control over this c file. And suppose if h6, he tries to attack this knight, then simply knight to f3. And in the next move, white will reroute this bishop to f2 and then to h4, which will target this queen. Okay, so in the actual game, after knight to f8, yeah, so here Kramnik Topalov goes for king to h1. Maybe he wants to push g4, which creates an attack over this pawn chain. But guys, instead of bishop to e7, here it's better for black to capture on g4. This is because after suppose rook takes g4, now comes bishop to e7, attacking this knight. But guys, you might be shocked that in this position, white can actually sacrifice his knight by knight takes e6. This is because suppose if black captured this knight, then now comes this amazing move f5, targeting this knight again. And yeah, basically this move do two things. First of all, as I said, that it attacks this knight, and secondly, it also opens the path of this bishop. And here, the only move for black is to bring this rook to f8, so and to give up this knight. But suppose if black is not careful and instead he decides to protect his knight back to f8, now this is completely losing for black because of rook at a goes to g1. targeting this weak g7 pawn, and the move like g6 is not going to work because of bishop to h6. And in the next move, white is going to capture this g6 pawn supported by these two rooks and this queen. And by this, clearly you can see this position is completely winning for white. Okay, so in the actual game, after bishop to e7, knight to f3, he basically missed this amazing sacrifice. And in this position, here Topalov gives up his queen by capturing this pawn on g6. And here you cannot capture this queen on c2. This is because if you takes, now comes g takes h7 check, king takes h7, rook to g7 check, king to h8, rook to g8 check, king to h7, rook at 1 goes to g7 check, rook to king to h6, and after that f5 check. And clearly you can see black will get checkmated in few moves. So that's why after this move h takes g6, here he didn't capture this queen, and instead here Kramnik finds the best move, which is h5, which directly attacks this rook. But in this position Topalov finds the another best move, which is g7. And now you can see this rook and this queen both are under attack, and still this position is completely equal. That's the beauty of prime Topalov. Okay, so here Kramnik decides to capture this rook on g4, and after that he promotes to queen. And now it's important to capture this queen by the king, so that he can get out from this rook takes g4 check. But instead he blunders by bishop takes f8, because now white can easily capture this pawn on g4 by rook takes g4 check. And suppose if bishop to g7, and you might be like, bro, now there's no more threat. But you are wrong, because of queen to c7. And clearly you can see now white is targeting this bishop on g7. And yes, black can give some check from f1 square, but simply knight to g1. And you can see now this is completely over for black. Okay, so in the actual game, after bishop takes f8, here Topalov decides to give a check from his queen. And now again in this position, Topalov finds the another amazing move, f5. Wow, what a move. Basically, this move do two things. First of all, white is threatening to push f6, as well as it also opens the diagonal of this dark square bishop, which can go to this h6 square. And here it's better for white to go for this move. So it's better for white to go for this move queen to h5 with the idea of rook to g3 and then rook to h3, which targets this king. But instead, he made a mistake by playing rook to c1. Yes, he wants to give a check from c2 square, but he forgets that black can easily counter this by rook to c2, asking for rook exchange. And now here white must consider bringing this bishop to c1. But instead he so basically it's important for white to keep this diagonal, to keep this bishop to this c1 diagonal, and he can go for bishop to g5 so that he can also support his pawn. And if suppose a2, then king to g6, threatening to give a check, and now black has to be careful. I mean, here black cannot promote this pawn to a queen, because let's suppose if a1 equal to queen, now this position is completely losing because of f7 check. And if king to so f7 check, and if king to h8, then simply bishop to f6 would be a checkmate. So that's why here he is forced to sacrifice his rook, but after that e takes f7 check, king to h8, bishop to f6 check, bishop to g7, and finally bishop takes g7 will be a checkmate. So that's why here after the move which is king to g6, yeah, after this move, here the move which can save this game and which is completely winning for black is not to promote, it is to play this amazing move rook to g7 check. Yes, we have to sacrifice this rook because of after f takes g7, simply bishop to a3, defending our bishop. And you can see in the next move no one can stop this promotion. And if suppose e7, simply we can sack our bishop and promote our queen. And yeah, that's all. But in the actual game, after the move, after this move rook to c7, here Topalov blundered by capturing this pawn on a3 by bishop takes a3. Here, instead of rook to f1, attacking this knight might be the better option for black. And in this position here, Kramnik gives up his bishop by bishop takes e7 because of after takes rook takes e7, and now you can see black can easily push this pawn. Yeah, okay guys. Here, instead of rook to e1, rook to e3 might be the better option for black, with the idea of bringing this rook to c file so that white king cannot enter and black can easily promote his own pawn. Okay, so in this position, white must consider king to c5 so that he can stop this pawn from promotion, but instead he made a mistake by playing king to e7. Yes, yes, he wants to promote his own pawn, but he forgets that here the move rook to h1 can be played by black so that he can give some checks to this king and promote his own pawn. And the best way to tackle this is simply sliding this king out from the range of this rook, but instead he made a mistake by knight to g5. And in this position, the final move by Kramnik is rook to e3, and here Veselin Topalov resigned because suppose if he brings his knight to a4 so that he can stop this h pawn from promotion, then black can simply push knight to b2 trying to stop this, but simply rook to e2 attacking this knight, and after knight to a4 king to d8 so that this king cannot come closer. Yeah, our rook is guarding, but we can move our rook in the next move, like suppose knight to c3 attacking our rook, then simply rook to d2. Okay, if knight to a4, rook to a2 attacking this knight again, and if knight to c3, b2, and you can see if he takes, then black will promote. So suppose if king to e5, then finally rook to a1, and you can see in the next move white has to lose his knight, and you can see black will be a rook up, and that will be completely winning for white. This is your host Bison signing off. Bye bye.